check out our newest exclusive video on Mussolini's black shirts over on armchairhistory.tv, along with several other Armchair Historian exclusives. Use the code below for a discount on your first month. It's a calm and pleasant Sunday in Boston, 1944. Italian soldiers in American uniforms maintain a victory garden, attend mass with locals, and enjoy delicious food. Just a few years earlier, they were behind bars in Texas, captured after Il Duce's disastrous desert campaign. But a single stroke of the pen changed everything. Across the Atlantic, Italian men shiver from the cold, hard labor, and lack of food. Hated by their captors and distrusted by their fellow prisoners, they suffer the full wrath of the Reich. Just a few years earlier, they were stationed on the sunny shores of Greece. But a single stroke of the pen changed everything. Few fates differ as radically as those of Italian soldiers during the Second World War. Although Italy fought as a loyal ally in the early war, the sudden 1943 armistice and side switching changed the situation for many troops on the ground. The fates of many captured Italian soldiers also vary greatly. The British Empire was the primary processor of Italian POWs. After almost 200,000 Italians had been captured between fall 1940 and spring 1941, prisoners were sent far away from the home isles. Fearing security risks, many Italians were sent to Australia and South Africa instead. Nonetheless, by July, the first Italians started arriving in Britain. These men proved to be an asset in the local labor market, however, and so for the home isles too, economic demand won out over security concerns. British authorities saw the Italian prisoners as an economic asset to alleviate labor shortage on the home front. For that reason, many Italians were not held in camps, but rather on individual farms where their labor was needed the most. Although soldiers were screened for fascist sympathies, especially those heading for Britain proper, the guarding was very lax. Besides farm work, Italian POWs engaged in other non-war activities per the Geneva Conventions. They worked in forestry, civil engineering, and infrastructure projects like Kenya's Great North Road. Although conditions undoubtedly varied throughout the corners of the empire, conditions were relatively good. In Working Camp 37, in Winchcombe, England, the Italians were active in an agricultural camp. Built by prisoners themselves, their dwellings were well-insulated huts containing air heaters for the cold British winters. There was sufficient light, ventilation, water, running taps, and 3 rations a day. Prisoners were paid for their work, and it was limited to 8 hours per day. They enjoyed books, plays, music, and sport. Sundays were spent attending mass with local villagers, followed by football matches against their guards and the village team. Regular mail from Italy kept them connected, with opportunities to send a letter and a card each week. Did you know that with the invention of aqua mirabilis, a clear substance made of 95% alcohol and imbued with strong scent, Italy became the center of the world perfume trade for several hundred years through the Middle Ages and Renaissance period? Thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Scentbird, I don't need to be a wealthy Italian noble to look and smell my best. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service whose mission is to empower everyone to express themselves through scent. I recently received Regent Leather from Tamine London, which has a great fragrance of lemon, saffron, roses, and musk, perfect for the office, meetings, and my everyday activities. My wife received Levant by Ormonde Jane, a beautiful soft fragrance with hints of bergamot, mandarin, peony, and amber. Each fragrance vial is filled with a generous amount of perfume or cologne, and they come in easy-to-use portable twist cases, which can be conveniently carried in a pocket or handbag. The best part is that Scentbird is affordable. Your first month is only $8, and after that, it's less than $17 a month. They have a diverse selection of popular brands like Versace and Prada, as well as niche labels Parfums de Marly and Roja that you can choose before committing to a full-sized bottle, perfect for fragrance lovers and novices alike. You'll receive a 30-day supply of each fragrance, and if you take their quiz, you'll get personalized suggestions based on your preferences. If you're interested in trying Scentbird, scan the QR code or use the link in the description below. Use my coupon code ARMCHAIR and get 55% off of your first month. Plus, you'll get free delivery to your door and a free case. Following the 1943 armistice, life changed considerably for Italian POWs in the UK. As Pietro Badoglio's new government aligned with the Allies, Italian captives had a choice. Those who cooperated enjoyed better conditions and freedom of movement, while non-cooperators were sent to more secure camps. Although the new government, and many Italians, wanted their soldiers returned home, the Allies were unwilling to give up this valuable labor force. Instead, the Italian POWs entered a strange legal limbo, where they were legally POWs of a nation that was now an Allied co-belligerent. In practice, this meant that the Italian prisoners were a flexible labor pool that Allied leadership could deploy anywhere, including in direct military work. In general, the experience of Italian POWs in the UK was relatively smooth. Although incidents of violence and clashes with the civilian population occurred, about 63% of the POWs chose to support the Allied war effort. After the war, the last POWs were only repatriated well into 1947. Italian labor proved far too valuable for the British Empire to release quickly. Many returned to Britain after their repatriation, for example, to marry the local women they met while in captivity. In the United States, the system was similar to the United Kingdom. When Italian captives began falling into American hands in early 1943, authorities hesitated to bring them to American soil, but economic demand again won out. POWs were put to work picking cotton, detasseling corn, and digging potatoes, all as replacement for those men who went to war. The conditions for POWs were good. One Italian serviceman recalls, at 6 p.m., the American soldier waiters returned with paper plates, wooden forks, and small glasses. For dinner, we have cheese, 1 egg, prosciutto, salad, iced tea, and grapefruit. We think we're in heaven. In particular, Italian mess sergeants had the freedom to choose their own help and create custom menus and dishes from scratch. Army chow turned into Italian cuisine, which even attracted American personnel to the POW compounds. During their free time, prisoners could enjoy sports, music, and theater. Camps included universities, where prisoners learned English, engineering, literature, and business. Educated internees even became POW professors. The US had its own program for Italian prisoners to contribute directly to the Allied war effort through Italian Service Units, or ISUs. 75% of the prisoners took this opportunity. These ISU units would help out in road construction, park cleaning, but also in military logistics. Although it's easy to frame them as simply auxiliary, these men also performed other crucial duties for the Allies. In one example, ISU soldiers used their native Italian to direct the partisans who fought Mussolini's fascist republic of Salo. Though officially prisoners, ISU men were paid like American privates and could get weekend passes. Although they enjoyed a very high standard of living for prisoners of war, the ISU path wasn't necessarily easy. Volunteers often felt inner conflict over the decision, as they were sometimes reluctant to take up arms against their fellow Italians and former allies. Despite the moral dilemma and hard work, American civilians occasionally complained that Italians were coddled. There was also friction between American units and ISUs. When American soldiers were dying en masse in northern Italy during 1944, it was hard for Americans to view Italians as co-belligerents. This animosity led to harassment and vindictiveness. Still, despite occasional run-ins, Italian POWs were treated well in the US, and ISUs were treated even better. One POW even reflects, "The Americans, they treated us too good. Too good." Many Italians, especially those who fell in love with American women, chose to build their new lives in the United States. Overall, the conditions of Italian POWs in Allied captivity were good. Although the labor was hard, and they remained prisoners before anything, the men were treated well and in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. Not all were so lucky, however. The armistice with the Allies produced an entirely new fate for Italian soldiers, those captured by the Reich. Following Italy's defection from the Axis, German troops swept into the kingdom and its territories during Operation Axis. The Italian army was in complete disarray and quickly collapsed. Some soldiers joined local partisan units or formed new ones. For them, the fight continued. Others would soon find themselves at gunpoint of their former allies. Many soldiers were forced to choose between fighting alongside Germans, disarming, or facing brutal reprisals. Although the exact numbers vary, it is estimated that the Reich captured some 800,000 prisoners. Here, much like the camps in the US and the UK, they were offered a choice to continue serving the Axis cause and join Mussolini's legions in northern Italy. The vast majority refused to return to the front, despite the tantalizing prospects to escape life in the German camps. The Germans saw the Italians not as prisoners, but as traitors. To Berlin, these men came from a government that had betrayed them twice, in 1915 and again in 1943. On top of that, Italian prisoners were treated without much sympathy from their fellow British, French, and Soviet prisoners. The Badoglio pigs, as the Germans called them, were deliberately assigned the label of Italian Military Internee, or IMI, to distinguish them from regular prisoners of war. By doing so, they were not legally protected by the Geneva Convention. Later in the war, many were again rebranded into civilian workers to eliminate the legal protection of the Red Cross as well. Italian POWs endured hard labor, poor shelter, and malnourishment. Hundreds died from tuberculosis, and thousands more from exhaustion and exposure in agriculture, mining, and filthy industrial workplaces. Some Italians who did not work hard enough were shot and killed by the guards. The annual mortality rate was about 40 per thousand, which is about 4 times higher than the average West European prisoner in German captivity. Even after Germany's surrender, the plight of some Italian prisoners continued. While many were released, others were reassigned by liberating nations like France, Yugoslavia, and the Soviet Union. There were 2 main ways for Italian captives to end up in the prison camps of the Soviet Union. Some were captured as part of the Italian army in Russia. Others ended up in the Russian cold after they were liberated from German captivity by the Red Army throughout 1945. For instance, soldiers interned in camps near Poznan in Poland were deported to a Soviet camp near Kharkiv. Of the some 65,000 Italians captured by the Soviets, only around 20,000 returned. Italian casualty rates in Soviet captivity were horrendously high. The rates among Italian POWs were around 57%, compared to 14% for the Germans or 30% for Romanians. These figures are in a large part due to the circumstances of their capture. Many Italians were captured at the Don front after the Battle of Stalingrad. Here, they had been forced to retreat on foot up to 500 kilometers or 310 miles with no supplies and temperatures reaching -30 Celsius or -22 Fahrenheit. Many succumbed to cold, hunger, typhus, and malnutrition. Numerous deaths occurred during the Divide marches to makeshift camps, railheads east of the Don, and during their transfers in overcrowded cattle cars. The conditions for these prisoners were appalling. The Italian representative to the Comintern appealed to Soviet authorities to improve conditions, emphasizing their potential as ideological converts. Many Italians volunteered for indoctrination programs, as the conditions here were better than those in ordinary camps. Despite the terrible conditions and mockery from Soviet soldiers, veterans recall the kindness, hospitality, and aid from Soviet civilians and local troops. While the fates of many Italians captured in the Soviet Union remained unknown throughout the Cold War, the Soviets were quick to begin and finish repatriation. Already on August 25, 1945, before Japan even surrendered, Moscow had made the decision to send prisoners home. The progress ended a little over a year later. In addition to those captured on foreign soil, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and bureaucrats became POWs in Italy, guarded by Italian soldiers. This bizarre situation resulted from Italy's civil war following its defection from the Axis. Those who served fascism in Italy experienced both lenient and extreme repercussions. After Mussolini's removal from power, the new government wasn't radically different from the previous regime. Although it aimed to punish fascists, the effort was extremely lackluster. For example, war criminal Mario Roata, responsible for ethnic cleansing in Slovenia, became chief of staff of the Italian army in the new regime and was entrusted by the new Badoglio regime to shoot peaceful protesters in Rome. He was only removed after Allied pressure. The military was barely purged, and the entire black-shirt brigades were repurposed into Royal Italian armies without screening or repercussions. High-ranking officers of the Italian Fascist Party even continued receiving stipends. However, as the fascist stronghold in the north crumbled by the war's end, the lenient tone shifted. Mussolini's violent death at the hands of partisans was indicative of the fate for many Italians who were in any way related to the fascist mission of the Republic of Salo. People's courts started trying fascists, encouraged by death warrants issued by the partisans. Although the Allies had declared that everyone who fought for Mussolini's Socialist Republic should be treated as POWs, the government and the emerged mobs did not share that view. The government wanted to punish the men and women as traitors, and the mobs wanted their heads. In cities like Milan, the Allied declaration was simply ignored. Although the government tried to stop the lynchings, especially after Mussolini's death, furious partisan mobs would regularly storm courtrooms and prisoners to try their fascist former oppressors by popular justice. Already in 1944, in recently liberated Rome, these partisans violently killed a former prison director who was responsible for the death of many of their relatives and friends. Just a year later, a group of masked partisans entered Schio prison and murdered 55 fascist inmates. While these lynchings took place, thousands more prisoners were rotting away in Italy's messy prisons, which were both extremely poorly run and overcrowded. In Coltano prison, where over 32,000 inmates were held, young men lived in an unpaved sea of mud, with scarce access to water and food. In nearby Casalina, a prison exclusive to women, the situation was deplorable, to a point where the Red Cross stepped in, citing the prison to be nothing more than a cesspool. These conditions were an embarrassment to the Italian authorities. Equally shameful were the stories of escapes. The camps had lax security, to the point where high-ranking fascist commanders could simply walk out of the front gates. Entrenched corruption meant that war criminals with friends in high places could place illegal release requests and then quickly hightail it to Switzerland or Spain. The partisan and political violence in Italy decreased considerably in 1946, as Italian leadership sought to distance themselves from the fascism which still permeated their government. The monarchy, largely seen as a fascist institution, had been abolished by popular vote. To mark Italy's rebirth as a united, democratic, and Western nation, the government proclaimed a general amnesty on June 22, 1946. The amnesty largely exonerated fascists and collaborators. Moderate Christian democratic factions in Italy relied on Christian virtues like mercy and forgiveness rather than further persecution and sanctions. Although these factions sought to heal the nation, the result was that thousands of fascists were simply let back into Italian society without any repercussions. Throughout these efforts to deal with the fascist legacy, the fates of Italian captured soldiers became a significant political asset. The new republic had to establish a narrative for itself as a Western democracy. The fates of the prisoners brutalized by the Nazis could be used to position Italy as a victim of Nazi aggression, while the fate of Italians in Soviet hands became a major political anti-communist cause. Despite their important contributions to the Allied war effort, those who had been in Western prisons were ultimately marginalized as an embarrassment to Italy's new identity as a Western democracy. In the decades after the war, memoirs from some soldiers say they still dreamt about and suffered from their time in captivity. Those who were in Russia were not taken seriously by local communist youths when they told their stories of suffering. Families were torn as brothers chose different loyalties. Soldiers returning home had no work and lived from a modest pension. Many returned with broken health. Not all returned to Italy, however. Many in the US or UK either stayed or returned there to build a new life. Don't forget to check out our website, armchairhistory.tv. We have a ton of exclusive content there, like our video on Mussolini's black shirts, Israel's modern military, a 50-minute documentary on the rise and fall of ISIS, India's annexation of Portuguese Goa, Gaddafi's Amazonian bodyguard, the Rwandan genocide, and much, much more. All of these are available to watch now for just $4.99 a month.